Faith Danielle Hedgepeth was born in 1992 to the Haliwa-Saponi Native American tribe in Warren County, North Carolina. Her parents separated early. She was raised by her mother with help from her older sister in Hollister and Warrenton. Faith was an excellent student in high school. She was active in extracurriculars, cheerleading, clubs, among others, and earned a Gates Millennium Scholarship to attend the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, UNC-CH. She shared an off-campus apartment with her friend Karina Lynn Rosario during her time at UNC-CH. Faith studied well. She had hopes of furthering her education beyond her undergraduate degree, possibly in teaching or medicine. She was 19 years old in September 2012. Faith's life was marked by promise and ambition. She came from a family that valued education. Her father had attended UNC-CH but not graduated, and she hoped to be the first in the family to do so. In the summer of 2012, she remained in Chapel Hill, planning for the fall semester. She and her roommate Rosario lived at a complex called Hawthorne at the View, on the border between Durham and Orange counties. She had personal relationships that, in hindsight, would form part of the narrative investigators would examine. For instance, Rosario's boyfriend, Eric Takoy Jones, had a history of domestic violence, and their relationship had ended earlier in 2012. Jones had allegedly tried breaking into their apartment after Rosario changed the locks, and Faith had helped her friend get a protective order. Jones reportedly resented Faith because of her influence over Rosario. Faith was typical of a college student in many ways, busy with studies, social life, ambitions, friendships. That normalcy is part of why her death shocked the community so deeply. Crime. On the night of September 6th into the early morning of September 7th, 2012, Faith and her roommate Rosario spent time together at UNC-CH, then went out to a nightclub. Specifically, they left the university library at evening, studied, returned to their apartment, then went to The Thrill, a now-closed nightclub downtown Chapel Hill, around 12:40 a.m. They were seen on security cameras leaving around 2:06 a.m. After leaving the club, they returned to their apartment. At some point in the early morning hours, events turned tragic. The last use of Faith's phone was a text sent around 3:40 a.m. to Rosario's ex-boyfriend, Brandon Edwards, asking him to come over, and a second message 3 minutes later. However, after that, there was no further activity on her phone. Rosario left the apartment around 4:25 a.m. to go get in a car driven by Jordan McCrary, a UNC student acquaintance. She believed Faith was asleep in the bedroom then. Before leaving, she left the apartment door unlocked. When Rosario returned later with another friend, Marisol Rangel, they found Faith's body in her bedroom, bloodied, wrapped in a quilt, partially nude. They immediately called 911. The autopsy determined Faith died from blunt force trauma to the head. She had numerous cuts, bruises, and blood under her fingernails, suggesting she had struggled. Also, semen and male DNA were recovered at the scene. Additional evidence was collected, a note left near her body on a torn-off portion of a white paper bag that likely came from a local 24-hour restaurant, a 911 call transcript, phone and text records, considerable forensic material including stain swabs. Importantly, there was no forced entry detected initially. Rosario had left the door unlocked. The scene showed signs consistent with violence having happened inside. The cause and manner were homicide. Discovery. Shortly after the 911 call, law enforcement responded. The scene. Faith's bedroom in the apartment she shared with Rosario. The body was found by Rosario and Marisol Rangel when they entered, after social contact attempts and worrying when Faith did not respond. The apartment was processed. Forensic teams collected physical evidence, blood, swabs, tissue, DNA, semen, skin, other. The autopsy confirmed severe head injury, bruising, and that Faith had fought. They also collected phone records, text logs, computer, social media access logs, bank or account access, Facebook, etc. Also early on, because of concerns about Rosario's then-boyfriend Eric Jones, who had threatened Faith, that someone might have been stalking or targeting them, investigators looked at his actions, his attempts to break in, and his threats. However, Jones was eventually excluded as a suspect. His DNA did not match the profile from the scene. Additional important discovery: a note near the body, as above. The 911 call transcript was obtained later and released to public via court filings. The note, on carry-out food bag, bore writing which may have been in anger, referencing "stupid," written on a bottom torn-off bag. Investigators believe the bag came from a local 24-hour restaurant. Phone and digital records provided a last timeline. The security camera at the Thrill showed Faith and Rosario leaving around 2:06 a.m. Texts from Faith to Edwards at 3:40 a.m. Rosario leaves 4:25 a.m. And then silence. Over time, many leads were followed. Pressure from media and community pushed for unsealing of investigative documents. In 2014, search warrants, some early evidence logs, phone and computer records, bank statements, the 911 call were unsealed. The autopsy report was released confirming foul play with blunt force trauma and evidence of struggle. Investigation. The investigation into Faith Hedgepeth's death spanned many years. Initially, Chapel Hill and Durham County law enforcement conducted interviews, collected physical evidence, and followed up on threats made by known persons, e.g. Rosario's ex-boyfriend. One early suspect, Eric Tacoy Jones, was excluded via DNA. Investigators collected DNA from semen and other evidence at the scene, compared to DNA profiles of persons of interest over time. Records were sealed early on. Many search warrants were filed, but not publicly accessible until media litigation led to unsealing in 2014. That provided more transparency. Phone logs, text messages, images, bank accounts, social media, Facebook access. Investigators also used forensic phenotyping. In 2016, a Virginia DNA testing company produced a composite image of what the suspect might look like based on DNA from the crime scene. The note left at the scene was compared and evaluated. Handwriting analysis may have been considered. The object used as the murder weapon was identified in the autopsy and crime site. Blunt force trauma via a bottle, rum bottle, or empty liquor bottle, was likely used. Investigators gathered thousands of pages of evidence, interviews, over 2,000 people reportedly interviewed, DNA tests on hundreds of individuals. Despite all this, no arrest was made for nearly 9 years. In September 2021, law enforcement arrested Miguel Salguero-Olivares, then aged 28, charging him with first-degree murder in Faith Hedgepeth's death. He was not initially a strong suspect in early years, but investigators linked his DNA to evidence from the crime scene. Also, a palm print on the murder weapon matched his. After the arrest, prosecutors amended the indictment. In November 2024, new charges were added: first-degree burglary, first-degree rape, first-degree sexual offense. Meanwhile, the defense raised motions, requests for independent DNA testing of blood samples and blood swabs to determine whether others besides Salguero-Olivares were present. ABC 11 Raleigh-Durham. Raising questions about blood found on Rosario's fingers, whether the roommate could have been involved or had contact with the scene in unknown capacity. A motion for expert witnesses regarding fingerprints on a bottle found near the body. The defense argues that latent prints or fingerprints on that bottle either don't match Salguero-Olivares or are inconclusive. Court filings show there are over 39,000 pages of evidence. Prosecutors expect to call about 30 expert witnesses at the trial. New motions also call for depositions of Jordan McCrary, who picked up Rosario from the apartment in the early morning hours. The defense wants his testimony concerning seeing Rosario with a bloodied finger. There is active litigation over release and testing of evidence. The defense does not dispute that Salguero-Olivares' DNA was found at the scene. Rather, the aim is to test whether there was presence of others. ABC 11 Raleigh-Durham. So as of mid-2025, the case remains under preparation for trial. Arrest. On September 16, 2021, Miguel Salguero-Olivares was arrested in Durham County, North Carolina, on suspicion of murdering Faith Hedgepeth. He was 28 years old at the time. The link that led to his arrest was DNA. A sample sent to the state crime lab matched DNA collected from semen and other evidence at the crime scene. Also, the palm print on the murder weapon matched his. Salguero-Olivares was not originally a suspect in the early investigation. He came into law enforcement's view later. His DNA was run in databases, and after comparison with the crime scene evidence, investigators believed there was a match. The indictment was later amended in November 2024 to include additional charges: first-degree rape, burglary, and sexual offense. These supplement the first-degree murder charge. After his arrest, court filings have shown a complex pretrial process: defense motions, evidence disclosure debates, independent testing, depositions of witnesses, expert witnesses. Also, Salguero-Olivares faces non-related charges stemming from alleged drug offenses while in custody. As of mid-2025, he was being held in jail, under no bond for the murder sexual charges. At present, mid-2025, the trial of Salguero-Olivares has not yet concluded. Several pretrial proceedings are underway. Prosecutors intend to call about 30 expert witnesses. The defense is pursuing independent DNA testing of all blood sample swabs, seeking to determine whether others were present at the scene. ABC 11, Raleigh-Durham. The defense is also pressing on the possible involvement of Faith's roommate, Rosario. Specifically, there are motions to depose Jordan McCrary, who drove Rosario early in the morning from the apartment. McCrary reportedly saw blood on Rosario's finger at that time. There is dispute over whether latent prints or fingerprints on a bottle found near the body implicate Salguero-Olivares, or whether they match someone else, including possibly Rosario. The defense emphasizes that there is some blood evidence on Rosario's fingers, but the state has not charged Rosario with a crime. Evidence already admitted in filings includes DNA match between suspect and crime scene semen and other biological evidence, palm print on murder weapon matching suspect, autopsy, bruising, blood under fingernails, cuts and bruises, phone tossed text records establishing timeline, note found near scene, forensic phenotyping, photo-video surveillance at the club, security camera footage. Challenges for the prosecution include establishing exactly what happened in the hours Faith returned to the apartment, whether evidence points solely to Salguero-Olivares or suggests alternate or co-actors, addressing roommate Rosario's presence and actions, latent print, fingerprint, attributable questions. The defense is trying to raise reasonable doubt using these. ABC 11, Raleigh-Durham. There is no public record, as of the latest verified sources up through mid-2025, of a verdict having been reached. Aftermath. The community response was strong from the start. Faith's death united many across Chapel Hill and beyond. The case stayed in public attention, partly because so many early leads were sealed and media pressure pushed for transparency. Faith's family and friends have repeatedly called for justice. Over the years, several public memorials and scholarship funds have been established in her name. Also, Faith being Native American added to concern that violence against Indigenous women sometimes gets less weight. Her case was cited in discussions about that broader issue. Through media coverage, the documentary and news community followed unsealed documents, the timeline, and new forensic technologies, DNA phenotyping, forensic genealogy, etc. The legal process, however, has been slow. The arrest in 2021 came almost 9 years after the killing. Pretrial motions, as of 2025, are active. Defense requests for evidence release and independent testing have added delays. The addition of the new charges, rape, sexual offense, burglary, indicates prosecutors believe there is evidence to support more than just homicide, that Faith may have been sexually assaulted, and that forced entry or burglary may have occurred. The defense is challenging crucial physical evidence, the blood swabs, latent prints, and role, if any, of the roommate. These challenges go to establishing reasonable doubt. The presence of Salguero-Olivares' DNA is strong, but as in many cases, DNA doesn't always tell the full story of what transpired. Another consequence, renewed calls for reform in how cold cases are handled, especially involving sealing of evidence. timeliness of DNA testing, transparency in investigative records. The Hedgepeth case has become something of a test case in North Carolina for balancing privacy, investigation effectiveness, and victims' rights. Legacy. Faith Hedgepeth's killing is not just a tragic individual story. It has wider implications. First, it highlights the advances and limits of forensic science: DNA phenotyping, familial matching, latent prints, and then later independent testing of DNA samples. These tools enabled law enforcement ultimately to identify a suspect, even many years later. Second, it underscores how sealing investigative documents can impede public awareness, oversight, and sometimes accountability. In this case, many warrants, phone and computer logs, etc. were sealed for years. That contributed to public frustration. Third, the case draws attention to cases of violence against Native American women, often underreported or under-resourced. Faith's identity as a member of the Haliwa-Saponi tribe is meaningful in understanding how communities perceive justice and trust in law enforcement. Fourth, the case raises questions about how to treat roommates or close friends in investigations. What responsibility or knowledge one had, what evidence is sufficient to implicate someone, and how those close social relationships are handled by police and courts. The motions concerning Rosario in the case reflect that. Finally, there is the lesson about patience and persistence, by the victim's family, by media, by investigators. After nearly a decade, new evidence, new filings, and eventually an arrest. But also, the trial is still pending. Justice is still works in progress. Justice and unanswered questions. As of mid-2025, full justice in the Faith Hedgepeth case has not been delivered, not in the sense of a guilty verdict in open court. The suspect is in custody, there are charges, key evidence has been matched, yet many questions remain unresolved. What remains uncertain? Exactly what happened in the apartment between return from the club, 2:06 a.m., and Faith's death. Timeline gaps remain, including what Faith's state was when Rosario left, what the roommate was doing, etc. The role, if any, of Rosario beyond being roommate. Why unexplained blood on her fingers? Could she have been involved? Is this simply a consequence of discovering the body or evidence of something more? These are contested in motions. The full chain of custody, condition of swabs, blood stains, whether degraded or contaminated, possibility of cross-contamination. Independent testing is being sought. The reliability of latent fingerprints or palm prints on objects like the bottle. The defense challenges those as possibly misattributed or unclear. Why so many years before arrest? What delays in DNA databases, investigative resourcing, and whether more timely methods could have prevented such delays? Where things stand, Salguero-Olivares faces multiple serious charges: first-degree murder, rape, sexual offense, burglary. The trial is forthcoming. Pre-trial motions continue. Many expert witnesses expected. Defense and prosecutors contest evidence. Strong conclusion. Faith Hedgepeth's case is deeply human. A young woman full of promise, her life cut short. The gaps and delays in the investigation are reminders that justice is not automatic, even when evidence exists. At the same time, the case demonstrates that even in cold cases, forensic science, persistent investigation, and community pressure can lead to breakthroughs. Salguero-Olivares' arrest after 9 years shows that truth may eventually surface, though the path can be long and painful. Justice in this case will depend largely on whether the evidence is strong enough to satisfy jurors beyond reasonable doubt. The DNA, the prints, the timeline, and how well alternate explanations are addressed. The defense's work to test evidence and highlight others to possible involvement is a standard component of due process. The unanswered questions about what exactly happened in Faith's last hours, about the roommate's actions, about possible additional actors, are not just technical. They matter for Faith's family, for the community, for the integrity of the criminal justice system. If a verdict with conviction is reached, it would bring closure, but still cannot erase the loss. If acquittal or partial verdict is reached, The case will continue to raise difficult questions about how justice is administered, especially in cases involving vulnerable populations. Ultimately, Faith's legacy is not only in the outcome of the trial, but in what society learns from her case, that sealing evidence too long can delay justice, that DNA and forensic science must be handled with rigor and transparency, that close relationships are often central in investigations, and that community vigilance and trust in investigative institutions are essential. Her death demands not just a verdict, but a recommitment to speed, transparency, fairness, and respect for victims. For Faith, for her family, for every case where the truth is still waiting to be told.